I'm going to assume a lot of you here are probably your data-inclined people in your organization, maybe not. You might be trying to get the other people in your organization to care about data. You might think it's important and they might not care at all about data. So I'm going to try to teach you how to teach them why it's important, and I'm also going to teach you why it's important in case you don't already know. So feel free to email me if I go too fast. Okay, so first of all, what is the data that you as an organization need to track? There's a lot of it. Each animal that comes in, it might not seem like there's a whole lot we need to remember about the animal, but there's a whole lot of information that you need to be tracking, and we'll talk about kind of why that's important in a minute. But this is kind of just a really basic breakdown of all the important things that you need to be tracking about every single animal that you own as an organization that is in your care. So intake, where the animal came from, any medical you provide or medical other people are providing for your animals, even if you didn't do the vaccines or whatever, you need to be keeping track of them. If you are doing your own medical, then it's even more important that you're keeping track of it for legal reasons. Behavior, any kind of behavior stuff, you can get in a lot of trouble if a dog bites somebody and then you don't tell the next adopter about it. So you need to be tracking your behavior. Marketing, to get the animals marketed, is usually kind of falls under data and marketing kind of separately, but your data team is probably going to have some involvement in it. And then outcomes, so what happens to the animal after it goes through your whole system? Is it adopted? Does it get euthanized? Does it die in your shelter? Does it transfer to another shelter? You need to be tracking that as well. One thing to keep in mind, if you haven't already started a shelter, if you have a small organization, you might not need all of this at once. You might be like, well, I only ever take in 5 animals a year that are owner surrender. I don't need to keep track of transfers from other shelters because I'm never going to transfer from another shelter. But you never know. In 5, 10 years, your organization might grow enough that you might start rescuing from other places. So it's a good idea from day one to have the capability to track more data than maybe you need to track on day one. Austin Pets Alive did not, when we first started it, we never expected we would have the capability to save from other cities other than Austin. We thought Austin is a huge problem, we'll never save from anywhere else, and now they save from tons of other organizations all over the place. So we realized we needed a way to track that, and thank goodness the systems we already had in place could keep track of that, you know, pretty easily. So it's important in the beginning to be able to keep track of everything, be prepared. Why does this matter? It's so hard to convince volunteers and employees and fosters, anybody, that data matters a lot, especially when it's like, oh, this litter of puppies is going to die, or go enter these contracts into the computer. Nobody cares about the data entry aspect of it. So I'm going to go over some reasons why it matters. Staying organized is really critical to your success. So I have kind of 2 examples. I helped start Austin Pets Alive way back when. I helped build their computer systems right from the start. I'm not a very computer-y person. I don't know a ton about computers. I'm not like a programmer, nothing like that. It's what I was tasked to do, so it's what I did in the beginning of APA, one of the things I did. And we built the computer system. It just happened this way. We built the computer system before we ever took in our first animal. And then in another organization I helped start with Dr. Jefferson, we didn't do it that way. We just started grabbing animals and rescuing them, and we were like, we'll deal with the computer systems later. That's not that critical. And we found over all these years that the systems we put in place in APA back in 2008 are still working today. I mean, we make a lot of little adjustments, but they're still working well today. The other organization, we didn't build that foundation to begin with, and it caused us struggles for years afterwards, and it took a really long time for us to get things in place, and it's still a struggle every day. So if you can start from the beginning, or if you already have an organization going, if you can as early as possible get a good framework for data management early on, it'll help you in the long run. You're going to need your data to be available years down the road. I've seen organizations that'll do like an Excel spreadsheet, and then when the animal gets adopted, they just delete the animal off the Excel spreadsheet, and then they don't have that data anymore, or some filing cabinet somewhere. And that's going to be a problem for you years down the road. And easily searchable is very key. It's not as fun as cuddling kittens, but I promise data is important. Okay, so some legal ramifications. Legally, you as a shelter, and in most states this is true, you're the owner of that animal, and that animal is your property. So anything you do to that animal, if you provide it with medical care, whatever you do, you're the owner, so you can legally do those things. It's your property, like your own car. If it's hard to define ownership in the animal world, and so if you have a computer system where you intake the animal and you say, okay, this animal is in our system, it can be a way to legally define ownership. It's how we say at APA. If they're active in our system, we are the owner of that animal. Veterinary records, if you provide any veterinary medical care at all, even heartworm prevention to your animals, it's a prescription. You can get yourselves, your vets, your technicians, your whoever in a ton of trouble if you're not keeping very good track of that. Shelter inspectors, like state inspectors, if they inspect you, they want to see your documentation very good for your veterinary records. And you have to keep it for years. So just typing distemper parvo in an Excel spreadsheet and then deleting it someday, that is not legally acceptable. So veterinary records are really important. And then contracts with outside agencies. At Austin Pets Alive, we contract with the city of Austin, and every single month, I make them a report that says where every single animal in our care is currently living, whether they're spayed, neutered, whether they're microchipped. Thousands of animals, we do this with every month, and if I didn't have this really good system to report that, I'd never be able to do that, and we wouldn't have our contract with the city. So if you're gonna ever contract with an outside agency, data is important. Grant writing, you might not do this really super early on, but as you get bigger and you wanna write more grants, they're gonna wanna know all kinds of details about your data that is not gonna be possible to pull up on an Excel spreadsheet or on a bunch of handwritten notes at home. You need to have something centralized for grant writing. Internal audits and goal setting, that's a really big one for us. Every year we kind of look at, okay, this PetSmart Adoption Center did 20 adoptions last month and we're spending $3,000 on adoption counselors. Maybe we shouldn't be going to that PetSmart anymore. Or this adoption counselor is doing 5 adoptions a month and this one's doing 100 adoptions a month. What do we need to be doing with these adoption counselors? Or all kinds of data like that. The vet clinic might say, we need more technicians. We have got to have more paid technicians. We can't take care of these animals. And you can say, well, you're doing less stuff now than you were back then, less vaccinations now than you were back then, so why do you need more help now? Or maybe they genuinely do need more help. But how do you know any of those internal audits if you don't have a good record-keeping system? So yeah, staff performance measures is what I was just saying. Money is always super tight, and every department is always going to come to you and say, I need more help, I need more paid, kennel staff, I need more whatever. And the best way to know for sure if they really do need more staff is to be able to say, well, okay, yeah, your department's been taking care of 100 more animals. You're right, you do need more staff. Or no, sorry, you haven't been taking care of more animals. Maybe you need to look at your internal productivity. Staff that work from home are horribly hard to track their productivity. We can go online and say, is this person doing this much work from home, because our system keeps track of how much work people are doing. Okay, so this is the computer system we use. This is just like just an example of a reports list. This is just like half of the reports that this computer system can give us. As you can see, it is a crazy amount of information that it can give you about your animals and these fun, and you can download it to a PDF and an Excel and all these things. So having a nice computer system that can do this kind of reporting for you is pretty rad. It's gonna make your life a lot easier. So not super fun, but it's vital to your success. Okay, so what system to use? I'm gonna say right now, I don't get paid by PetPoint. I don't think PetPoint is perfect. So I'm gonna talk about PetPoint because it's what we use, but don't think I'm like some spokesperson for PetPoint or anything like that, because I'm absolutely not. And I would talk more about the negative aspects of it, but I think it's the best one out there, so I'm gonna talk about the positive aspects of it. So this is PetPoint web-based software. This is what we use at Austin Pets Alive. It's what they use at San Antonio Pets Alive. A lot of organizations use it. It is free. If you use 24-hour PetWatch microchips in your animals, you should be microchipping all your animals anyway. 24 PetWatch microchips are relatively cost-effective microchips. They require you to advertise for them on your website. You just put a little banner on your website. And you have to give away their free insurance, their free pet health insurance, which is not a bad thing. If you do those little rules that they give you, then they'll give you the software for free. So that's kind of awesome. You don't get all functionality for free, but you get more than enough to be fine. You can buy upgrades, but you don't need to. So how to join, you can just go to their website. There's their phone number on there. Setup and training is provided by PetPoint for free, and they have very good technical support, and they will have web conferences and web videos with you to walk you through every step of the way setting it up. All of your employees, they'll have in-person sessions with you, so that's also kind of amazing. One piece of advice that got kind of cut off, have all of your key people involved in this setup process as much as possible so that they have buy-in, because forever, you know, your vet techs are going to be like, I don't care about some data system. Your veterinarians are really not going to care about your data systems. Your adoption counselors are not going to care. But if you can get supervisors and team leaders involved right from the start, from the setup process, they have buy-in. They'll be more motivated to keep it up. Okay, so what staff do you need to manage your data? You could go completely bare bones and have nobody who's specifically data, but I don't recommend it. I think it's a good idea to have a data team right from the start. A data manager, data analyst, you can live without that for quite a while, but I think it's a good idea. Your data analyst is kind of your PetPoint guru. There's somebody who is probably involved, like me, and on day one from setting up the whole system, so they are sort of experts at it, because it's a complicated, confusing computer system. Most software is. So it's good to have your little person who can say, oh yeah, this is how you do this. This is how you answer that question. Data analyst is also something I do, is run reports and stuff like that, because that can be a little complicated. So it's nice to have one central person do that stuff, but you don't have to. And then your data entry staff, there's different ways. Do I have that as a slide? No, okay. There's different ways that you can manage your data entry. So some shelters, the person walks in, they want to adopt a dog, you do the data entry right there, the adoption, everything right there at the computer. If you have like a central desk or whatever, the receptionist just does their whole adoption contract, everything's processed on the computer right there, okay? If you do that, then you don't have to have a bunch of data entry late at night. Problem with that is, if you have adoptions going on at PetSmart, if you have 10 adoptions going on and one person at a computer, people are not going to want to wait for your person at the computer to process their adoption. So at APA, for most of it, San Antonio Pets Alive, the data is all hand done, adoption contracts, intake paperwork, medical paperwork, behavior forms, everything's done on paper and then submitted later. So we have data entry staff that works from home primarily, that are night owls, so they get all the information on their computer at home. We'll talk about how that works. And then they just sit and enter the data all night long so that it's all fresh and pretty in the morning, so all the updates are done. I keep thinking things are on slides and they're not. Okay, so the pros and cons of letting them work from home. Obviously, if you let them work from home, they don't take up a computer, they don't take up desk space, they don't need an office. Working from home is kind of nice like that. They can work when there's data to enter, but if there's no adoptions that day, then you're not paying them to do nothing. If you have someone sitting at a desk all day doing your data entry, if you have a very slow day, they're sitting at a desk getting paid to do nothing. But you can really monitor them better, or you could multitask them. If there's not a ton of data entry in a day, you could have them go clean kennels or whatever. So there's pros and cons to it. We've struggled with both. We've thought before, we're just going to outlaw working from home. It doesn't, it's hard to manage those people, but then it never seems to work to have them always work in person either. So some departments, medical, can work in person a lot of times. They just enter it as the, medical is done, but adoptions a lot of times have to work from home. So you just kind of have to see how your organization works best. The nice thing about PetPoint is it's web-based software. I would highly recommend any web-based. So you've got software that's on like the disk that you have to download onto your computer. So it's only on however many computers you download it on. So nobody can work from home. Nobody can access it on their phone, all that kind of stuff. You can't access it at, PetSmart or whatever. Web-based software, anyone can access it with a login and a password from anywhere that has internet access. So PetPoint is web-based. I love that about PetPoint. It makes it very nice. I could access it right now if I wanted to. Your data staff is going to cost you money. You can have every piece of data entry be done by a volunteer pretty early on. Data entry is not fun and it is not pretty, and so people don't like to do data entry as a volunteer. They want to walk puppies. So finding volunteers to do it and to do it well and to be efficient and good at it, that's really hard to do. They'll be like, oh, sorry, I didn't get to that data entry last night. So this is one area where volunteers almost never work out. So this is kind of your cost. If you're doing 100 animals a week, it's probably going to take you about 2 full-time data entry staff members, plus maybe a data manager that's part-time if you choose to have a data manager. I don't think APA even has a data manager right now. So you can live without it. It takes about an hour per animal of data entry if you're doing all the medical, all the behavior, all that stuff in the computer system. Hire people that can type quickly. We learned this early on. I would interview people and they'd say they type 60 words a minute, and then I'd put them in front of a computer and they'd type 20 words a minute. And every minute that they're taking extra, multiply that times the thousands of animals, it's costing you a ton of money. So make them take a typing test. There's free online typing tests, and you can test their speed right away. So you can know, and test yourself and be like, ooh, I need to learn how to type faster. But you want people who can type really quickly. Oh yeah, and every minute added to data entry, if you're having people enter a lot of unnecessary extra information, like color patterns or, I don't know, stuff that maybe isn't as important, just keep in mind every extra minute of data entry adds up when you're doing so many thousands of animals. So try to have lots of information, but keep it as concise as possible. So how do we get all this data from our adoption counselors, our vet clinic, our parvo ward, our nursery, wherever? How do we get it all to the people that need to do the data entry? Receptionists or data entry people. So what we use is called end of day reporting. We really like this. We use this at Austin Pets Alive. San Antonio Pets Alive uses it. It's good stuff. We like it. So basically, it's a comprehensive report compiled by the staff throughout the day that shows everything that happened that day. So all the intakes that happened, if you got them from another shelter, you would have a kennel card from that shelter, right, that has that animal's information. Or if you got the animal from the owner, you'd have an owner surrender form about that animal. So that would be its intake information. If an owner surrender brings it in and they're surrendering it because it broke its leg, and here's their vet records, that's part of your intake paperwork. If they gave a bunch of vaccines at the kennel, then you'd have all those vaccines on a piece of paper to submit. So everything that was done that day, adoption contracts, an animal that died, you need to have a way to record that. So everything that happened that day. You'll usually want to have like a synopsis cover sheet on top to make it easy to dig through this pile, because end of day reports usually are like 150 pages long for our organization, so they get big. So having a synopsis cover sheet can help you keep track of it, and we'll go through that in a second. So it just says, okay, these are the 20 animals we took in, these are the 5 animals that left, these are, just basics, one sheet. So it's really easy to look at that end of day report and be like, oh, okay, there's that animal, his contract is in this end of day report. Who does it? Anywhere where something happens to an animal, you should have an end of day report happening. So if there was an off-site adoption event, even if no animals were adopted, they probably took in a few donations. So they should probably have an end of day report, because you can keep track of your financials on your end of day reporting. Your parvo ward, your Khaleesi ward, your nursery, your whatever you have in your organization, every PetSmart, every adoption center should be submitting their own end of day reporting. How is it submitted? Ideally, scanning it in and emailing it. That's not super effective in every situation, because you need a multi-scanner that can multi-scan fast and a computer that can email it. You need internet access. It's not always available everywhere. Faxing it, pretty much every PetSmart and Petco has a fax machine, and they will let you use it. You can use online faxing to receive your faxes. It's called myfax.com. It's pretty cheap. It's free for a few faxes a month, and then it's like 20 bucks a month or something after that for a bunch of faxes. And basically, you give someone a fax number, and they can take a real fax machine that's hardwired and fax it to that fax number, and then it'll email it to you in a pretty little PDF. So it's pretty cool software. There's lots of different softwares like that, just online fax machine. You can Google it. So that's another way to get information in, is faxing it. Taking a picture with your cell phone and emailing it. You don't have to get high tech with this. If you're in the parvo ward and you don't have a computer because of disease or whatever, take a picture with your cell phone and email the documents if you have to. Whatever you have to do to get the data in, it works. And then where does it go? A really good idea is to have a distribution group. We use Google Groups. We use Gmail and Google Business software for everything. It's free or super cheap for nonprofit organizations. I highly recommend getting it. They have groups and calendars and all kind of good stuff on there. But anyway, so we use a Google Group, which is just a distribution group. So a person scans in their documents or takes their picture with their cell phone of their end of day documents, and then they send it to this one email address, let's say paperwork at blah, 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 and then it sends it to everyone who's going to need it. Data entry people, managers, medical staff, whoever's going to need a copy of this end of day report. So that can work. Another option is just a centralized email box, make a fake, Yahoo account, whatever, and then if you don't have, anything fancy like distribution groups, and just have all the paperwork go to one inbox. I wouldn't recommend having it go to like so-and-so's personal inbox, because if so-and-so quits or gets hit by a bus, then all your paperwork is in that place. You want all that paperwork in one centralized area. So make a paperwork at yahoo.com if you have to. It has to be every day without fail at the end of the day. And this is the hardest aspect of an end of day report, because it's 9 o'clock at night and you just took in 27 bottle baby kittens and they're all hungry and they need to be fed, and who's going to do the end of day report? Nobody's going to want to do the end of day report. And then, and then the next day, they're going to come in and they're going to have 100 things that they need to take care of, and they're not going to look at your end of day report you didn't do yesterday, and it's never going to get done, and this data is going to stack up and it's going to get behind, and adopters are going to be like, why is my animal's records not updated? Whatever. So you just have to really just drill it in. You don't do your end of day report, you get written up or whatever, and you have to have somebody who's in charge of it. The supervisor for that department needs to be in charge of making sure that end of day report gets done. It's not so bad if you use we use like file sorter systems that are just like intakes go, and this, pieces of paper go here, medical pieces of paper go here, outcomes go here, whatever. It's not so bad if you do that all day long. I just took in a kitten, I'm gonna stick its intake paperwork right there, I'm gonna forget about it. Then at the end of the day, all your supervisor has to do is grab all those pieces of paper, make a cover sheet, fax it in. Takes 30 minutes maybe. So it's more manageable if you kind of do it all day long, give them an easy system for it rather than trying to go around and find all those kitties' intake paperwork at the end of the day. That's not going to happen. So just drill it in and make it a rule and make it the culture, and they'll fight it at first, and then they'll get used to it, and then it'll just be something you do every day. So this is an example of an end-of-day synopsis that you could choose to do. This is the low-tech version. So it's handwritten. You can see that the synopsis has intakes on it, adoptions, moves within the organization. So this kitten left my adoption center and went to a foster's home. It didn't get adopted. It's not an outcome, but it's a move within my organization. Or this foster dropped off this litter of puppies for the adoption center. It's a move within the organization. Released to be euthanized is what that means at the bottom left. So it's so sick and it's not getting better, and we've tried every treatment and it's suffering and it's not a treatable illness. Maybe we need to euthanize it. That's where that goes, or animals that die in our care, that kind of thing. So just the basics. We don't need a ton of information on this synopsis. This is handwritten. Let's say there's no access to a computer. Let's say you're in a parvo ward that doesn't have a computer at a PetSmart. Your person doesn't even have a cell phone. They should, but they don't. They could handwrite it. Worst case scenario, take a picture of it, and at least that data is captured in somewhere. Okay. It's not searchable, and that's the biggest downside of this. You can't, if you're later like, oh my God, whatever happened to that dog? It says we still have him. I know we don't. You could search the email address that receives your synopsis, and if it wasn't handwritten, if it was typed, then it would pull up that end of day report. You could be like, oh my God, there was an adoption contract submitted, and it never got entered in the computer. Oops. You know what I mean? But if it's not searchable, then you're going to have to dig through every single end of day report to find it. So it's an option. It's low tech if you have to, but I don't recommend it. I do recommend this type. This is a typed synopsis. It's literally in the body of an email. Not a big deal. They just have a saved email that is the outline of it, and then they just fill in the information. So there were these adoptions done at this adoption center. This foster brought in an adoption contract. Money, you can keep track of money on your end of day synopsis if you want. I think it's a good idea. Who moved in to the adoption center that day? Who moved out? Nobody. Supplies needed. They send this to their managers, and so they can communicate that way without having to send 10 different emails. I need hand sanitizer, and then 2 hours later, I need paperwork. Whatever, you can just put it all in your end of day report, and it's all in one nice place. Head count, how many animals are actually in my location. So this is really nice, and then if I couldn't find an animal, I just search my email, and it'll bring up this email, and I'll be like, oh, this says it went to foster. Okay, now I know where that animal is. I can update my computer system. So these are nice. Even if you just have a cell phone or a tablet, you can type a quick email on a cell phone or a tablet, whatever you got to do to get that information recorded. And then it just sends to a distribution group. This one's called CAT EOD, end of day, at whatever your organization is, and that's a distribution group. Checks and balances. This is something that you'll kind of build as you go along, and you realize, we keep missing writing down parvo shots. How can we make sure that if it gets missed here, we find it somewhere else? Because mistakes are going to happen. If you're doing, 50 adoptions in a day and 25 intakes and 100 vaccines were given, there's going to be data entry mistakes. People are either going to forget to write things down, the data entry team's going to mess up and forget to enter things, typos are going to happen. So it's a good idea to have checks and balances as much as you can build them into your systems. So for instance, if you're at an on-site adoption center, each adoption counselor, I processed 4 adoptions today, and this other adoption counselor processed 5 adoptions. They write down their own little synopsis. I did these 4 adoptions today, and I did these 5, and they turn that in with their contracts in the little bin. Then at the end of the day, the manager pulls that out, goes through, is making the final synopsis and is like, oh wait, you said you did 4 adoptions, but you only turned in 3 contracts. Oh, sorry, it was in my pocket. Checks and balance. So it can be pretty simple checks and balances, and it's something that if you run into a big data mistake happening constantly, try to think, how can I build in another way of looking at this data so that we can catch these mistakes as they happen. You can run reports in PetPoint. This is something we do when our data entry team is done with all the intakes for the day. They run an intake report for that day and make sure the computer says the same thing the end of day synopsis says. Really easy 2-second checks and balance. Okay, so this is what I'm talking about. There's lots of bullet points. Don't feel like you need to write all these down. This is just an idea of what you're going to be collecting, what you should, as an organization, be collecting on your data. You might not collect all of it right this minute, but these are goals to have. So for your intakes, you're going to need all the information about the animal, its name, breed, age, sex, colors. You should have a good system in place for making sure people know how to age an animal, know how to come up with the breed of an animal, make little charts on the wall if you have to, so that if your intake people are not medical people, they don't know how to age a puppy, make a chart so they know how to age it. So that's intake stuff. You'll need intake medical, where they given vaccines at intake, where they given flea prevention. You need to keep track of that. Previous medical, a prior shelter's workup, if the owner's prior vet did a workup. Any behavior evaluations the prior shelter did. If the prior shelter notes that dog was surrendered because it bit a child, and you don't put that in your computer system, and then your adoption counselor adopts that to a person with a child, and it bites a child, you can get sued for that. So you need to be careful about that. Owner surrender information. I owner surrendered my puppy to you, and then I changed my mind 2 weeks later. Well, that puppy got euthanized for suffering untreatable distemper or something. Well, I'm going to sue you because I didn't give you permission to euthanize my puppy. I have your owner surrender form right here. Now you're safe. If you don't have that owner surrender information, they could sue you if they want. A picture, even if it's a bad picture, just put a picture in the computer. Even if you're not using your system for marketing purposes, having a picture saves your butt so many times when you have this litter of 7 puppies that aren't microchipped yet, and you could be like, oh, that picture, oh, he's got a white spot on his nose. Okay, this is this picture. Sometimes that can help you out. So even bad pictures are better than nothing. Where it's going, so is it going into your shelter and going to a foster home? Is it going to this set of kennels? Is it going, where's it going once it gets in? Where did it come from? It's really nice to track. Was this a public intake? Why was it a public intake? Why are these people surrendering it? So we can run statistics, grants on these kind of things. If you are rescuing animals from a shelter and you're rescuing a bunch of parvo puppies from the shelter that's going to kill them and you're saving them, you could write a grant and say, we had to rescue 500 puppies from this shelter due to parvo. We need money to treat our parvo cases, and you'll have a good, strong case there. If you're like, I don't know, we saved a lot last year, I don't know why, you're not going to be able to write as good of grants. So that's intake reasons. And then returns. It's really good to track, of course, adopter returns. That counts as an intake because you outcomed it to an owner and now you're intaking it back in. It's a return. Reasons why they're returning is really good to track so that you can run statistics on that and say, hey, we're having a lot of landlord issues. We need to be doing better training of our counselors to deal with landlord issues so that they're not getting returned, that kind of thing. So forms you're going to need. You're going to need so many forms, and they should be in your book thingy. If you want electronic copies of something, email me. I'll get you electronic copies of all these forms. Use everything we give you. Feel free to just use the exact versions of it. Forms you'll need some kind of animal information sheet. If it's from a prior shelter, that's awesome. You can just use their kennel card that they probably will give you. If they don't give you a kennel card, you need to have some kind of information sheet. You need to have something that's fill in the blank so people can't forget things. Every form you have should be fill in the blank, because when you're doing 50 puppy intakes, you're gonna miss stuff if it's not fill in the blank. It's fill in the blank, you can't forget to age them or write their color down or whatever. So intake forms, medical intake forms from your shelter, you should be doing even just looking at the animal and writing down how it looks at intake, even if you're not vaccinating it or anything. Owner surrender forms, of course, those are super crazy important. They need to have legal stuff written on them. I'm legally surrendering this animal. Adoption return forms, which can be the same. We use the same thing as our owner surrender form as our adoption return form because it's an owner surrender. Include every piece of paper you get with your intake in your end of day report. Include every piece of paper you touch in your end of day report. It's not going to hurt anything to have it in there, and then later if the dog chews up his medical records from his previous vet, you have copies of it. Even if it's not going in your computer system, you have copies of it in your end of day report that you could reprint out. So put everything in your end of day report. It's not going to hurt anything. So this is an example of an intake kennel card from San Antonio's shelter. Just this one simple kennel card gives us so much information. It's amazing. Kennel cards are the best for intake. So don't remake your staff write down an intake form. If you've got a kennel card, you can just make a copy of, right? Try to save time. This is just an example of an owner surrender form. You can see our big, fat paragraph right there saying, I am letting them have this animal. I release all ownership, because you can get in trouble otherwise. Locations is another thing you're going to need to track. This is the hardest thing to track in a shelter, is keeping track of where that puppy's going. If it starts in the parvo ward, goes to an ex-parvo ward, goes to a foster, goes to an adoption center, gets adopted. Locations are hard to track. People will be like, oh my God, I don't know where that puppy is. Oh yeah, that foster took it home. Well, did it fill out a foster sign-out form? Oh no, I forgot. Or did you write it on the end of day report? No, I forgot to have them fill out a foster sign-out form. We lose these puppies, the foster adopts it out, never turns in a contract, and then the puppies are lost forever. And then what do you do? So it's important to include locations early on in your process of tracking data. If they're going to foster sign-out sheets, foster transfers. Your fosters will get to know each other on Facebook, and then they'll say, oh, I'm going out of town, can you take my puppy? Sure, and they'll take it, and they'll never tell you, and you don't know where your puppies are. This will happen to you all the time. So having a transfer system in place, an online form that they can easily fill out, or an email address they know to email if they hand their puppies to someone else, is very helpful. Have a system in place for that. Foster return to your organization. Fosters are going to dump those puppies back on your door when they pee on their couch. You need to have a form that they can fill out and turn in with your end of day report, so we know these puppies came back, so we know, hey, maybe this foster shouldn't take puppies anymore because they can't handle when they pee on their couch, whatever. So it's a good idea to have that. On-site locations, you need to track who's going to and from them, obviously. Daily census, we're going to talk about that in a second, is essential to catching mistakes. And then do you have animals that go to vet clinics and get hospitalized for 3 days? You need to keep track of that. You don't want to lose that animal. Does it go to that vet clinic, it dies, the med clinic knows that the animal died, but the data team doesn't know, and so it never got outcomed in the computer system. How are you going to keep track of that? Boarding facilities, anything like that. Easily, just list your location changes. Email, if it's like, it's too complicated for me to put this on the EOD, I don't have time for that. Then fine, just email me if you know a location change happened, the data email address. Email it so I can update it in the computer system. Team leaders should be in charge of their areas. This will happen to you. So what we do is, I was also a cat foster manager of APA for a long time, and as a cat foster manager, when I knew I was putting cats into foster from the shelter, or I knew fosters were transferring, or whatever I was arranging as the cat foster manager, I would go in the computer myself and update that. And every member, the dog foster team, everybody did that. And so that made them responsible for it. So if my cat foster locations were all messed up, it was my fault, and it would hurt me in trying to keep track of my animals. If you don't have your team leaders in charge of it and your data team's the only people in charge of it, then if they're not very good about submitting that data properly, they're not going to care very much. So it's good to have your team leaders in charge of their own locations. And then they wrote it on the EOD so the data team can keep track of it. So that's a checks and balance. The daily census, so this is how we're going to keep track of this. So a daily census is done daily, and it's to help ensure that our animals are being tracked properly in our computer system. So this is an example. What we do is we print this out in the morning. Let's say we're at our dog kennel. Print it out in the morning. Here, volunteer, or here, adoption counselor, it's a slow hour. Go around and make sure everyone who's in the computer, that says it's in the computer in this location, is physically here, right? So then they walk around and they're like, oh, the computer says Fluffy's here, but Fluffy got adopted yesterday. What happened to its paperwork? Or Fluffy got adopted last week or whatever. So they go through and they write it down, because your data entry team, they're not on hand with those animals, so they're not going to know specifically what happened with them. Or let's say, well, Fluffy's here, but the computer doesn't say Fluffy's here. Why doesn't the computer say that? Oh, I forgot to write down that Fluffy got returned by his foster. Oh, okay, let me write that down. Then we submit this handwritten piece of paper with our end of day report, or we can type it in our end of day email, And then the data team can be like, oh, you guys forgot to tell me that foster returned that dog. Okay, let me fix it in the computer system. If you don't do this census every day, you're going to end up with the data team being like, hey, you guys have this dog listed in your location. It's been there for 3 months. Do you guys really have this dog? And they're going to be like, no, we haven't had that dog in months. Well, what happened to it? I don't remember. That was 3 months ago. We have a lost animal. What do we do with this lost animal? And it's lost. And then you got to try to find it, which you won't always find it. So doing a daily census will prevent that because they'll remember, oh, yeah, we adopted Fluffy yesterday and forgot to turn in his contract. Your medical team needs to be entering medical data logs, which this is an example of a really easy medical data log. This is good for like adoption counselors and stuff that are just running through and giving a whole bunch of vaccinations super quick. Obviously, this was not really filled out as well as it could have been by the person, but they were clearly in a big fat hurry, so they just threw ID numbers on there, and what they got on there, it's something. It's better than nothing, right? You probably don't want to use this kind of multi-animal per page system if you're doing like the vet clinic's doing big parvo treatments or something, because there's not enough room to write very good information. But this is good for an adoption counselor who's running through and giving a bunch of frontline. Medical request forms for on-site animals so that your adoption counselors aren't always running to your medical team and being like, this dog has diarrhea, and then the medical team's busy and they forget. Have a form that they can fill out and put it in a bin, and then when the medical team has time, they can grab those forms and go look at those diarrhea dogs. Rabies certificates, only if you have vets obviously giving your rabies. Parvo paperwork forms to keep that organized. Your medical team should be making an end-of-day report. They're not going to want to, but make them. If they're doing their own medical, especially complicated medical, and on those, instead of doing like a data log, you could have an individual. No, I don't. Sorry, I thought I had an example. You could make a form for the medical team to fill out. I've got this puppy with a broken leg. I'm not going to put it on this tiny little data log. Where am I going to write all this stuff about its broken leg? Where's my vet going to make its notes? So have a form for that puppy with its broken leg that the foster can fill out symptoms, your vet can fill out treatment plans, whatever. Send it in with the end-of-day report. That data can get entered into the computer. So your medical team should be doing their own end-of-day reports. Or they might have an animal that they're working on and it dies. They need a way to report that too. So your medical team should do end-of-day reporting. Your behavior team should do their own paperwork. Maybe if they're just doing behavior at the on-site location, they can just submit it with their end of day. They might not have to make their own incident forms, owner surrender forms, logs, anything behavior. If somebody's like, volunteer gets bit, they should be writing that down. It should get in your end of day report so it can get in the computer system. Marketing materials, Pet Point specifically can hold 3 photos, 1 YouTube video, and a written biography of the animal, which is pretty cool. And those will automatically load onto your website if you want them to, and they're automatically removed from your website when you outcome the animal out of the system, so you don't have to remember or pay someone to go in and remove all your adoptions from the day. You could have volunteers doing your marketing stuff. People do like to do that, photography volunteers, whatever, and a lot of times they're willing to upload their stuff themselves, so you might not have to pay somebody to upload your marketing materials. You might be able to have volunteers do that. They like to do that. Also, an online form can be helpful if you can get your website to do an online form for fosters to submit their pictures, or have an email address for them to email their pictures to, so you can get it online. Outcome, so outcome is when the animal is no longer owned by your organization, so this is a final. This isn't going to a foster home, this is final. So adoption, died, euthanasia, transfer out, return to owner. Anytime that they're no longer owned by you, you'll need to have an outcome, and you'll need to have a system for keeping track of that. Adoptions, obviously contracts. Died, how are you going to record that? You're just going to write it on its kennel card and submit that. That's fine, whatever you got to do, but you need to have a way to track it. Transfer to another rescue. If you work with other rescue groups, you should probably have an application for them to fill out to make sure they're a kosher rescue, and then have a form for each animal that they sign saying, I accept ownership of this animal, I accept its disposition, whatever. So again, for legal reasons, I'm not the owner of that anymore. It's not my fault I bit that kid. It's their fault. They're the owner of it now. So good idea to have transfer forms. Oh yeah, and don't delete it out of your database. Don't have some system where you can't keep track of it. Like medical records, legally, state of Texas, you have to keep them, I think, 5 or 7 years or something. Every state has rules like that, so don't just ditch it when the animal's gone. It might be back on your doorstep tomorrow when the owner returns it or whatever. So don't just get rid of it. This is just paperwork for adoptions. There's lots of paperwork you're gonna need. You know, contagious disease disclosures, put that in your end of day report so that later if they come back, my kid got ringworm, Well, here's a copy. I can print it right out of my end of day report of the form that you signed. It can help keep you safe. I say all these things because these are all examples of things that happen. Foster home adoptions, try to have a foolproof system for this. Foster homes are going to find their own adopters for their kittens, and they're going to give them away without doing any adoption paperwork. I've seen this happen, and you're going to be like, what happened to all those kittens? Oh, I don't know. I found them homes. I need paperwork. So have a system in place that all your fosters are aware of, that they, they sign. I know I need to come on site and do my contract or whatever you need to do to make sure you get that paperwork. And again, include every piece of paper from your adoption in your end of day report. Insurance and Microchips, 24 Pet Watch registers with 24 Pet Watch their microchips for free for the first year or something like that. When you process the adoption in Pet Point, it just automatically registers that microchip. So it's kind of cool. It doesn't do like Avid or Home Again or any of that. Make sure if you do insurance that you have a form that they fill out, because they're constantly going to be like, my puppy got diarrhea and it's cost me $500 and I want you to pay for it and I didn't get that insurance. And so it's a good idea that they know how the insurance works if you're doing the 24 Pet Watch insurance. We have a little handout that they sign that explains there's a deductible, there's an out-of-pocket max, whatever. Microchips, make sure they know how to register their microchips. And then we have the data team email insurance, post-adoption paperwork, everything to the adopters after the adoption. So they email a copy of the medical records, the insurance information. Don't forget to register your insurance. Don't forget to register your microchip. Have your data team do that when they're processing their adoptions. They can just automatically email a form email to your adopters, and it can kind of help keep them in the loop. And it can give them an email address to contact if they have problems after the adoption. So insurance and microchips, it can be a little bit of a hassle, that insurance, but if you have free Pet Point, you have to give it away. And adopters kind of like it. Died, euthanized, when it died, why it died. Don't just write that it died on Tuesday. You should probably try to track why animals are dying in your system. It's good to be able to say, we've got a lot of kittens that are dying of, whatever, upper respiratory infection. Maybe we need to change our treatment protocols. Return to owners. You might return some animals to their owners, so have a form for it. Here's where it says rescue. You should have a transfer form. A rescue application is kind of a good idea. Include it in your end of day report. It's an outcome. It's not your dog anymore. It's their dog. Lost or stolen. Pet Point has the option of recording an animal as lost or stolen. So I got a foster, took that puppy, will never call me back. We went to its house. They pulled the gun on us. I'm never getting that puppy back. I need a way to outcome that my system is stolen. These don't count towards your live release in most shelter systems. Most reporting your lost or stolen animals don't get to count as a live release. They count the same as a deceased animal. So if you've got a foster who's like, I want to adopt this dog, but I'm not going to do your paperwork and I'm not going to pay you, maybe just go ahead and adopt the dog to them to give you a live release rather than marking it as stolen, because it's not going to help you to mark it as stolen. It'll help you to write it as an adoption. If they're a foster that loves the animal and they're keeping it, it is an adoption. So try to minimize your lost or stolen animals. Obviously, lost animals are the animals that get lost in your system and you never found them again, and hopefully you won't have this because you have good checks and balances, but if it happens, you might have to record an animal as lost because you lost it in your system or because it ran away. So have a way to track that. This is the last thing. You don't have to worry about this if you don't want to, but I wanted to throw it in here. It's called the Asilomar Accord. Some of you might be familiar with it. It's a thing in California. I put their website on there. I'm not going to go into big detail on what it is, but some grants are going to tell you, we want an Asilomar report, and you're going to be like, what is an Asilomar report? So again, the Asilomar Accord, you can read about what I mean when I'm saying that weird word Asilomar. I think it's like a city in California or something. Some grants require you to do it. Basically, you can tell Pet Point or maybe other computer systems, I want to track Asilomar status. The status is basically saying what condition was that animal in when it came into my system and what was the condition when it went out of my system. So was it healthy and behaviorally and medically sound when it came in, but then it was adopted out sick? That's probably not going to happen. Did it come in sick, but it was adopted out healthy? That kind of thing. That's what the status is. So that's all you're tracking, is just how it was when it came in, how it was when it went out. A lot of times you're not going to know how it was when it came in because you maybe do the heartworm test a few days later, whatever, so you might not do Asilomar tracking. We do it in Austin, and we've actually had some grantors want that report, and it's been like, yeah, I know I've got a leg up over the other organizations who aren't tracking this data. So it's another step to add in, but it can help you. And then if you do keep track of it, Pet Point can run you this report, and this is the same report that every Asilomar report will generate if you do the intake and the outcome status in your computer. So if you're interested in Asilomar reporting, PetPoint can do it. Asilomar Accords can tell you more about it, but don't feel like you have to worry about that. So I put it as the last slide because it's kind of killer. Okay, I'm done. And I made it in time, barely.